Today, our webinar is about digital innovation, and I think it's fair to say that if we are here today, it is actually thanks to digital innovation, to all the tools that we've been using and that allowed us to get to know each other, despite the fact that we were all geographically apart from each other. Our chapter's mission is to build a solid and interactive network made of SIBS alumni from Italy, based in Italy, and or with the center of their interests in Italy. Our goal is to ultimately become a point of reference in Italy for the whole SIBS community while fostering communication, promoting cross-chapter events, and creating synergies with the local businesses and organizations. And having said that, let's move to today's webinar. Everyone is awaiting that. So our two special guests are from Italy, and they both happen to be SIBS alumni. They will share their thoughts and expertise on some of the most discussed aspects of artificial intelligence. And they are Mr. Davide Falasconi. Davide is the Chief Innovation Officer at Italy's Ministry of Technological Innovation and Digital Transition. Welcome, Davide. And then we have Paolo Roncaglia. Paolo is president of Gruppo Roncaglia and the co-founder of Eileen, a predictive AI startup that will be introduced later in our webinar. So welcome, Paolo. And joining and moderating our discussion today, our super professor Shamin Prashantam, SIBS Associate Dean and MBA Program Director, as well as one of my best professors of International Business and Strategy. And so, Professor Shamin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Margarita. So this is really a wonderful initiative that has happened, this chapter formation. But I can't think of a more important topic with which to begin than AI and communication. And I thought Margarita put it so well that, in fact, the way we're having this event itself reflects that. Now, I am kind of a little bit lost as to why I got this great opportunity to be part of this event. I can't claim to have a particularly strong association with Italy. I can't claim to be an expert on AI. So what I did was to try and have a connection with Italy. I looked through my wardrobe and I found the one shirt that has this logo. And so I thought, if I'm wearing a Benetton shirt, then at least I have a little bit of credibility. And then I was thinking about AI. So I do a lot of research about how startups and large corporations work together. And very often for the large corporation, especially for traditional ones, the interest in dealing with the startup is that the startup has relevant digital capabilities. And very often I find that they are AI related. So to just give you an example, Walmart has been actively engaging with startups in China to solve some of their pain points. For example, those of you who have been to China may remember how if you go to a big supermarket and you buy loose vegetables or fruits, it's a bit of a hassle, you know, as they say in Chinese, mafan, because you have to take the loose vegetables and fruit and then put it in a plastic bag, and then you have to wait in line to get to an IE who will put it on weighing scales. And you know, people will cut the line and irritate the hell out of you. And then by the time you get to the IE, she's also very hassled. People are trying to get in her face, and then she weighs it on the scales and then gives you a little sticker on it, which has a barcode. And so Walmart said to startups in China, hey, can you help us to make this process a little bit easy? And it ended up working with an AI startup from Shenzhen, which uses image recognition and now has a weighing scale where you can just, after you fill the plastic bag with fruit or vegetable, place it on top of it, and a bunch of images will come up, one of which will be that fruit or vegetable. And it's a one-touch solution. You just press that particular image, picture of the fruit, and you get a little sticky label with a barcode, and that's you. And I can't read Chinese very well. So that is useful to me as well because I can recognize the picture. And Walmart was so impressed by this that they actually used this startup's technology, worked with it in their home market of the United States, in Walmart's home market, to address a different problem, which was in-store theft. And so in that way, sort of AI has sort of tangentially come into my life, and I have been very impressed to see AI startups around the world engage with traditional corporations and turbocharge what they're doing. But given my ignorance of the subject, I did what all good academics do. I went to the library and I looked for the book, and I came across this book, which is called Competing in the Age of AI by two Harvard professors, Ian City and Lakhani. And I flipped through it to get some ideas, but then I thought, let me see, is there any reference to Italy? Now, by the way, I hope you realize what a genius Margherita is, because she picked this topic and this date knowing that by now there was going to be a big announcement of a large American company announcing the acquisition of an Italian AI company in the last few days, Invenio. So she had this cunning plan, and that was all part of this whole master plan. But in this book, there is one reference to Italy, and it's to a place called Prato, which you all are familiar with, I'm sure, much more than me. But it refers to Prato in the 15th century, where, according to these authors, organizational design, the notion that you could divide organizational activities and separate them, was something that was pioneered by the textile companies in Prato. Now, this absolutely fascinated me. And of course, the argument they go on to make is over the last 500 years, organizations have developed ways in which to organize their activities, and AI fundamentally transforms this. But this was just wonderful for me to see, because although I've never been to Prato, Prato is a place I have heard about from almost the beginning of when I came to China 10 years ago and taught in a place called Ningbo. Ningbo is a port city in Zhejiang province, which is neighboring to Shanghai. And the capital city of Zhejiang is Hangzhou, which is where Alibaba is based. Ningbo is the second city. And the third city of Zhejiang province is a city called Wenzhou. Wenzhou people have a very strong link with the Prato area. And, with co-ethnic ties built over time and the Wenzhou community over there, there are many links between merchants in Wenzhou, China, and merchants in Prato, Italy. And in fact, the community is so big that there was an article in The Guardian referring to Little Wenzhou in Italy. But there was the person who told me about Wenzhou and Prato's connection first was one of my undergrad students. And she came to my office after one of my first lectures in China. So this is about 10 years ago, with 3 boys. So the 4 of them came and they said, "Oh, Professor, you're talking about some interesting stuff about international business. If there's any research assistance we can give you, that would be great. And, you can learn more about Wenzhou merchants and how they connect with with Italy." And that's what this girl said. And the 3 other boys said, yes, and we can help you to talk to Chinese businesses in other cities in Zhejiang. And then this girl's phone rang. And I just discovered, having arrived in China, that there wasn't voicemail. And, I said, please go ahead and answer the phone. And so she started talking. And the 3 other boys were giggling away. There's no other way to describe the way they were laughing. They were just giggling. And I felt very left out. I couldn't understand what this girl was saying. Obviously, it was hilarious, and I felt extremely left out. And these boys were understanding what the joke was. When she finished the call, when she'd hung up, the 3 boys looked at me and said, "We didn't understand a word of what she said." These 3 lads were from other cities in Zhejiang, but the Wenzhou dialect is so impenetrable even for other Zhejiang people that this has actually become one of the bonding features of the Wenzhou community, and why even within Zhejiang, they are such a distinct community. And that reminds us of the long-standing importance of communication, and how, in fact, that has, in some ways, given us an identity and given us a sense of belonging within that community, but also distances us from other communities. And the link between Prato and Wenzhou is one that is predicated on culture, but what I've understood about the Wenzhou people in particular is the importance of language and communication. Now, fast forward to the 21st century and the age of AI, and it is now possible for a lot of these communication barriers, it would appear, to now be significantly reduced or amended in some ways. And yet, I think AI will still not fully replace the personal interaction, the importance of building trust. And I think, therefore, it is very important to be considering the role of AI and how it transforms communication, what it means in terms of what we need to do differently, and in fact, what will remain as enduring characteristics of the human experience that will remain important even in the age of AI. And so I think I am looking forward to learning a lot from this panel. And so I now look forward to the remarks from each of the two panelists.
Many thanks, Shamin, and thanks a lot. And really pleasure to be here with you, with everybody, for this creation of the Italian chapter. And I would try to go, given the topic about artificial intelligence and communication, a little bit on this item and how complex it is. Starting, maybe I would just share a couple of slides that would help me into this. So I would just start with a few numbers here. Artificial intelligence, as you've shown, is a new era, trillions of expected growth. Actually, the forecast by 2030 is that the global GDP would grow 26%, which means basically more than the China and India combined GDP. It means then like a tremendous, terrific amount. At the same time, COVID-19 has accelerated significantly this process, and we've seen a lot of activities also in our daily lives announced by artificial intelligence and their application, automation, contactless cashiers, etc., etc. And therefore, companies have started this or accelerated even this process, and governments as well. And in particular, there is an important aspect here that it's true that artificial intelligence would replace some of the jobs, but at the same time, we expect that would create much more, many more jobs than they would actually be displaced. And although the fork, the range between these two numbers has been a little bit reduced recently, if we just consider the most recent estimates, still these numbers show how this will be important for the future. I think I'm not saying anything that new, but I would ask you also a question here. Well, how much you think that this trend would change the future? It would be beneficial for the future of all of us. Probably everybody would say, yes, for sure, is the trend, is the direction, and it must be a priority for everybody. Good. But now, stop for a second and try to think about this. Have you ever applied for a job? I mean, we are an MBA alum, MBA network, so also applying for a job is an important part. And then you have been rejected because you have been pre-screened by an AI algorithm. How do you feel about this? This is an important question to just also a simple item, but to give a different perspective when you look at AI. AI is probably one of the most complex topics to look at. And based on this, also World Economic Forum tried to look into how complex it is. and try to identify the different elements you should consider. So what is the purpose of it? So where you could apply. Also how you can enhance or manage the diversity, the inclusion, or make yourself more efficient in terms of the jobs, in terms of your competencies. And for sure, there are also some geopolitical impacts of AI. And although you can see here a complex circle, I think it's very important to have such a holistic approach, because each of these areas are tremendously important. Now, without bothering too much with this complexity, let's just have a couple of snapshots on few items that would be important to highlight. Probably we would need a full course not to go into the AI, but just a couple of snapshots that I hope that would be relevant for you, for companies, also from the government side. So first of all, as I said, the purpose is the main sectors, challenges for the companies, and also the governmental action. Today and later we will see also now the speech from Paolo on one item here that is one of specific, the digital communication. So how this big picture encompass one actually can apply this, and how maybe also Paolo and his company has overcome some of the challenges. So first of all, sectors. Here's a picture of the Italian AI market divided by sectors. And here we can see how there are a couple of sectors that are leading on this, mainly banking. Also, we mentioned about telco, media, and communication, which has 12%. But it's very different, the growth that is we are experiencing in the last years. And this comes from another important aspect, is how companies are able to react and monetize out of this. And second, also the size of the different companies. This is an important aspect that you should always consider. And therefore, multiple sectors are reacting differently, and you should always consider this to look in the future, the 2030 view that we have seen before. In particular, if we try to see at the challenges that you are experiencing, and I can tell you they differ significantly between small and medium companies, for instance. So first of all, three key items that are shaping, enabling the AI diffusion: data availability, a big data approach, cloud, IoT. Data are critical in this area, probably the most important part to look at. At the same time, put them together in the right way and being able to manage, it's by far a different topic. Third, what kind of competencies that you need to look into this? Most research profile, AI engineer, AI manager, which instead is on top of being a little bit technical, is also an industry expertise, a sector expertise, and data analyst. Here, data comes again. Now, let's assume that you want to start such a thing, and you are a small or a big company. It's very different how launching an AI project can impact your P&L, especially if you are small, because you need to have multiple competencies, complementary one. But this, maybe we'll see later on also how maybe Paolo has overcome some of this. Barriers to AI project. First of all, budget investment in terms of resources as well, because you need to commit for this. And sometimes the commitment goes beyond the fact that you have a guaranteed success. Innovate means also to fail, to try several business cases. And therefore, you need a very, very important commitment from the top and middle management with adequate incentives, and also the identification and similar business cases to apply them, to test them, because it's not trivial at all to prove that this will actually provide definitely some inputs and some benefits. Also, then let's assume that you want to start this. You definitely need to partner with somebody who actually made this their own business. And we have seen that typical and most typical partners are system integrators, then cloud provider or consulting companies. And in general, to come back to the element of the small and medium, the more you go to externalizing such a thing, the more you can productize, make it able also for the market to apply such a thing. And finally, critical issues when you develop such an AI project. First of all, as I mentioned also before, data availability, integration, and usability. At the end, you engage in this and you realize that managing this data, it's really, really difficult. Second, experiment this and being able to create the team, to create the environment, and then apply it and make it scalable. And finally, regulation, security, privacy. And this is another important aspect. And as soon as you talk about regulation, you may also think about the role of governments. And coming to this, the role of governments actually is double. No, you can see that they can act on the offer side because they can make new regulation. They can actually deregulate some items, some sectors, in order to make some investments in AI aspect flourish. But at the same time, they have another important role, which is the demand side. Actually, public sector can tremendously benefit from the AI applications, even without going too much in the, in the subtle and hot topic like justice and this. There are many other, from automation, from simplification of processes where AI can play an important role. But what I here want to highlight is that the most important component for governments, as well for the companies we've seen before, is to allow to be able to experiment before scaling. And one new, to a certain extent, tool that was adopted by governments was actually what we call here sandbox, or an environment, a protected environment where you can test different things, and then you can scale it up. You can scale it up or by the market, or, as I say, inside the public sector, because only through this approach you can really understand the issues, the risk from the personal side, from the impact on the citizen, and as well in terms of political dynamics and industry balance. We've seen many examples from here. I just mentioned some of them, from UK, from Norway on personal data again, US, Israel, but this is just not an exhaustive list, but where the sandbox have been applied in AI in fintech, which is one, and we've seen before, one of the most advanced sector in it. Or in Sweden and Singapore, AI had applied to advanced mobility. This is also the area where everybody talk about autonomous vehicle. I mean, autonomous vehicle without AI does not exist. It's not autonomous at all. It's just a vehicle. So new regulation is emerging for this, and the government has also the responsibility to make it human-centric, trustworthy, sustainable. Shamin mentioned before how trust is relevant, how you must be able to know what comes up out of this. And just for the last 2 minutes, let me mention one specific tool that in Italy we introduced in September, which is leveraging, building on this sandbox approach, but is going even beyond. So we actually introduce it to universities, innovators, to experiment in derogation to the law when the law does not allow you to make such innovative technologies applied into the context, into the real context. So if you want to experiment the autonomous vehicle, or maybe the small droid that delivers last mile packages in the cities, well, you have big troubles, and not only in Italy, everywhere. Well, we created this where you can actually apply to the Ministry of Innovation and Ministry of Economic Development, and in a very simplified approach with a certain time, you would receive an answer. And actually 30 days plus 30 days for the authorization to start, in order to be able to overcome all the hurdles in it, in order to push forward how the ecosystem can react. And this, I think, is a great opportunity for Italy also to attract additional investments from other countries. Of course, there are some excluded areas that are managed or in their own sandbox, like fintech, or some areas where it's not that easy or advisable to go into, like national security. Maybe you would not get a, let me say, a waiver for national security purposes, but all the others you can actually apply to, and this is the main push beyond the typical traditional tools that, of course, in Italy, Europe, we are trying to push from incentivization, etc., etc. This is a little bit the picture. I hope that has been useful to at least have a, as I say, like a nano snapshot on this such a complex topic, and I hope you enjoyed it. Then, Shamin, Paolo.
Wow, fantastic. That was just an excellent overview, bang on time. Thank you so much, David. And Paolo, over to you.
Yeah, hi there. First of all, let me thank everyone, all of you guys here, obviously, and mostly I would say the school in China and as abroad, because quite frankly, what I am now, it's very much driven by the experience I lived and living in China as I did, and studying there was a huge chunk of it. And having said all that, before I start talking about my vision on Eileen and AI, maybe it's easier if I start showing a brief video that basically talks about what Eileen does.
Data is the new oil, an incredibly precious resource in dramatic expansion. Do you know how much data is generated each day? 2.5 quintillions of bytes, a value that will grow by more than 900% by 2025. Yet the potential of big data is not fully exploited. Just like oil extracted from a field, it is essential to refine the large amounts of data constantly generated to make them really useful. The value of the data depends on its analysis and understanding. I am Aileen, and I help you transform raw data into knowledge into strategy. So let me briefly explain how I proceed. First of all, I analyze and understand relationships. Then, I analyze and understand meanings. Finally, I analyze and understand behaviors. Would you like to discover more?
Let me start from what I do and what has been my whole life, basically, job. I work in a communication industry and in a communication company. And how has communication evolved throughout history? The almost Neanderthalensis and so on and so forth, at the beginning, the communication didn't exist, or it was basically just gesturing. From gesturing, we went to oral communication that later became written communication. Then Holy Grail Gutenberg arrived, and so we started being able also to print, which made a huge leap forward. From that, basically, we arrived to radio, TV, and in the last 20 years, more, 40 years, we arrived at digital communication. The same thing happened also, and the same evolution, basically, they always go in parallel, arrived with commerce. And commerce and communication, on my personal point of view, are at the very heart of us as human beings, and therefore of us as a civilization. Now, how can AI, going back to what David has mentioned before, help with all this? Well, we went communicating, you talk one to few, one to many if you're addressing people in a square. But then when you go on written communication, that's already much bigger. And if you go from written to digital, potentially it's enormous. But basically what I discovered, and this is literally my personal experience, and so why I went into this bit of the business, is that through digital, you can have access to literally hundreds of millions of people. And I personally did various times with clients that I was working with, basically have to manage communication for 200 and over million people. And you realize that basically human being, no matter how many employees you have, cannot simply manage that kind of volume. You simply cannot. When you have 200 million people asking you, or somehow expecting you to deliver content to them, whether it's communication or it's commerce, whatever it is, you just cannot. And so that's why AI kicks in, and that's why AI helps basically doing all this, because it simplifies, it brings all together, all the data, it automatically selects what is the right thing for the right people to give, And on this basis, you are able to customize content in massive amounts. And on this basis, basically, you're able to deliver a personalized communication or a personalized offer to individuals. And that's what Eileen does. Eileen basically connects to most social medias, all the digital point of access, being blogs, forums, portals, and search engine, you name it. He sees all the trending topics, both on an aggregate level and on an individual level. And by basically analyzing each one of them, is able to offer a content that is precisely done for that person with those interests for that specific moment. Let me just give you a small example on how, on my point of view, the whole industry is changing. We have all gone through this very tough COVID year in the last year and a half. And I don't know if you noticed what I noticed, but I realized that unlike what I originally had thought, that people were just sharing good news on social media, I realized basically that people are sharing all sorts of news on social media. People go and put a picture of me and my newly born kid in the hospital just now. Or at the same time, people go and literally, sadly, this was last night for a friend of mine, they go on social media and say, unfortunately, my husband passed away. I mean, those small bit of information individually have a value that it's minuscule, 0.0000000 something. But for that specific person, no matter what is the value perceived as an industry to that information, it's massive. If I had just a newly born kid who popped up last night, my life is not going to be the same anymore. And my life changes dramatically, as Davide knows. But on top of that, let me just say, not just my life changes, my habits, my consumption habits, my topics of interest, the whole ecosphere of my life changes. And obviously, if you don't have AI, and so if you just rely on people and some raw data, even quite frankly, if you just rely on CRM and past data, well, you cannot access on it because you frankly, no one will be able to tell you such a massive amount of scale of information on a prescriptive level, meaning on future looking. Maybe, I mean, obviously that's what CRM does. You can have it backward looking, but not forward looking. So what does Eileen do? Eileen bringing together machine learning, deep learning, NLP, natural language processing, whatever it is, and computer vision is able to analyze all sorts of data, visual, video, content, bring them together, basically mix them and match them with CRM databases, e-commerce databases, or more simply, OTT platform, basically of communication basis, and basically help create content, being text or visual, being commerce or not commerce, or being action-driven in the case of CRM, that is individualized on a single point level. Has been a great experience for me. I realized, to be very honest, as an entrepreneur, how much more can I do? Because this originally, and I don't want to dwell into it because I don't think it will be of any interest to anyone, but originally when we started investing in this platform, it was for my own interest, because I realized that I was doing huge things that at the end, my clients, and therefore me, were not using it to the very full extent. But basically now that we've been using it, and we've been using it's as big ingrained as part of the company culture of my Gruppo Roncaglia as such, I basically realized that the opportunity are massive in all possible ways. Quite frankly, even in industry, those are not mine. And so that is it. And that's it. So I can leave now. Should I pass you both to you, Shameen?
We have time now for some questions, but maybe use my prerogative as the moderator and ask kick things off a little bit. Maybe let me ask a question of you, David, and one of you, Paolo. And incidentally, I just thought between the two of you, you covered so much good ground in such a short period of time, right? And in a sense, Though you talked about a lot of things, David, one of the things you picked up on was the role of government, this broader macro picture. How can government use AI as an enabler to make their services more effectively? What is their role, on the other hand, on regulation? AI raises all kinds of issues. And I thought the focus of Paulo, more at the level of the firm, talks about two of the very important, what Island seems to be able to do, giving you insights, helping you with prediction. And, this allows companies and individuals to do much more with AI. And I thought that was very fascinating. Of course, China is very much, you see both of these at play, right? The role of the government. And I think one of the things about China that's interesting is the role of local government. So I was mentioning about Zhejiang province. Hangzhou, where Alibaba is headquartered, has this AI town within Hangzhou involving Ali, Zhejiang University and others. And just yesterday, I was at Zhangjiang High Tech Park here in Shanghai, which has the so-called AI island within the park. And so that's interesting. Of course, Chinese companies are working very hard, both on the insights piece and the prediction piece. But if I go back to David and pick up on the government, you mentioned governments have a great role to play on AI development on the demand side. Where to focus and where do you think is the most potential? That's for you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Shamin. So I think that AI can, when applied to public sector, can dramatically reshape the picture of the government, how the government interacts with itself. So inside the machine of the public administration, try to imagine how much bureaucracy exists between central and local governments. But if we look at the sectors, I think that a couple of them could dramatically change the economics of governments, so of the, let me say, P&L, of the state P&L, and also the life of the citizen. I would say, first of all, it comes with the healthcare. There are studies that show how simply sharing data, which is the enabling factor to go to AI, would actually cut between 2 and 15% the total cost of the healthcare system, which is an incredible amount. Just to give you a simple item, especially this applies to countries where you have like a public welfare cost. If you go for an X-ray in a certain hospital, it may happen that after a while, you don't go to the same hospital or the same clinic to do a checkup. Well, the other hospital and the other clinic doesn't have a clue of the same X-ray you made. They may require another X-ray, the very same X-ray you made before. And this it's just on the data side, the first layer. Now, let's mount AI on top of this. So first of all, this layer can cut duplication, redundancy, etc., etc., etc. Typically between 2 and 5%. Still a huge amount, trillions, if we look at the world. Just a state like Italy, between 4 and 6 billion, just nothing. On top of this, you mount AI. AI can help, and COVID-19 has proven this. AI can help you just to build on the same X-ray example to spot specific triggers, like in the early warning system that have been already applied in the banking side to spot triggers. That doesn't mean that AI will do the full job, 100% of it. AI said, that's it. You can actually identify where the AI can improve the effectiveness of the diagnosis, because can spot different things, and on the other side can improve the efficiency of the diagnosis. You may deploy, it doesn't mean cutting the jobs, it means dedicating the doctors to the most important part, which can be also the customer experience, which customer experience is the patient. Looking at the patient, helping him, listening to me, understanding different things that AI would never be able to do. This is just one of the examples. There are many others that have been experimented already on the judging side, on the justice side. there are tremendous amount of claims that are stuck there for 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, even for very small and simple thing. Now, why don't apply AI to have, again, I use again the same banking example because we've seen from the numbers, and probably everybody think that the fintech world or the banking world is the most advanced on this. Then, as well as you apply for a mortgage, nowadays there is no bank that doesn't run sometimes AI, but even more basic stuff to just assess your mortgage and accept, decline, and maybe try to have the manual evaluation for 5%, 6% of them. The others, they go automatic. This can be the same on the justice side. Maybe it would not be the same percentage, would be a little bit less. But this is another important element where I would say it's critical to act.
Super. Very, very nice and great examples. Thank you for that, David. Paolo, if I can just turn to you and ask you, what is your experience in terms of now being an entrepreneur in Italy? I mean, you've really had a lot of experience through family and otherwise. What is it like to grow a startup in Italy?
Well, in this industry, it's unusual. But at the same time, that's a great opportunity, to be very honest, because basically it allows me to be able to have, I know it's not the right term, but have a little sandbox on my own, at least as far as competition is concerned. So I can grow, I can test, and I can develop around the industry and the company, sorry. And from there, I can move on. I mean, it's more complicated to get resources. Obviously, it's more complicated to get the whole ecosphere around it, entrepreneurial, I mean. But to be honest, I believe that this comes with people. And I'm fortunate, to be honest, to have gone to schools such as SIBS and such as LBS, because basically that allowed me to have, first of all, a broader point of view on the whole world. And second, also to have context that, to be honest, I am already leveraging in order to grow the company. But if I can add a point to what Davide was saying before, what really shocked me, I saw this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that an AI, talking about the health system, an AI, which I cannot mention, but it's basically the biggest AI from the biggest IT company in California, when applied to doctors and to specifically to X-ray, it's more accurate than the best oncology, because it was based on oncology in California. And this data were 2017. And AI works on learning. So that it will learn more. So maybe if I can go and add on what Davide was saying, the two industries, meaning AI and people, in the end are together, and they need to work together, because basically one is the statistical layer, or if you want to, the data layer, that only human can act upon. And this is also true for me. I saw, I'll give you an example. Basically, going back to my own company, Eileen creates text. Let's stick to the social media bit or to the written bit. And he creates text, and he sees what every single individual has done, has said, or whom he has talked to in the course of the last month, 2 months, whatever it is. And on that basis, he builds a content that is right for that person, individually done for that person. That content done by the machine is statistically perfect, because I know exactly what you're going to be interested in tomorrow, and what you would like to know about tomorrow, and who you like to talk to tomorrow. So that's right on. However, the text itself, written in perfect English or Italian, or eventually Spanish, Portuguese, blah, 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 it's not really appealing. Meaning, I think we all buy medicines when we need to every once in a while, and when you open the medicine box, inside there is the instruction letters. Those instruction letter, it's done basically, and it's exactly perfect in what it writes. It writes exactly what are the content, what are the possible consequences, blah, 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 blah. However, has anyone really felt extremely interested in reading it? No, obviously you don't, because that text is meant to be perfect. It's not really meant to be appealing. Now, the appealing, the empathy, the ability to relate to humankind, that's only part of human. And there is no way, and frankly, if anyone knows how to, please be my guest, to be able to even write on a code or computer code the term empathy. The computer may know what we talk about and who we talk with and what I'm going to be interested tomorrow, but it does not know how to make this appealing for me. And because I come from a communication industry, being appealing, it's not a minor detail, it's a huge bit of the business. However, until 2 years ago, there was one part of the industry that was just talking about how to make it sexy without really having a substantial ground underneath. And on the other side, there were some appearances of data, and the two were not talking. Well, what Eileen does with people, it's actually bring them together. That's why we call it humanly sustainable technology, because it's a technology that without human just does not work.
Fantastic. I think this is one of the common themes that's coming out from both of your comments about the interaction between the human and artificial intelligence, which is fascinating and, frankly, from my point of view, reassuring too. Okay, great. We're doing great for time. We have about 18, 19 minutes left, and there are 4 questions that have been posted. Let's just maybe go in this order. So it starts with a question for David from Rubens. What is Italy's position in the world regarding the development and adoption of AI?
Yeah, so first of all, AI is defined as a emerging priority technology. So it's definitely a position of Italy going into this. Italy actually has published just a few months ago, like 5 or 6 months ago, a paper on the Italian strategy on AI, which implies some directions and some concrete action to pursue. Direction is, of course, well, not necessarily of course, but I'd say, of course, aligned with European Community direction. And just 8 days ago, European Commission published some of these principles. And some of these principles are exactly what I mentioned in my slides before. So to be human-centric, trustworthy, to also diversify across risk. There are minimum risk, not pursuing risk, etc., etc. So, but the main aspect here is you must go over AI. There is an effort that Italy and Europe together must pursue to grow on AI. Example, that something we are running, digital innovation hubs, which means creating center of excellence across Europe and inside different countries to be able to have this technology emerge. And have another thing which must be trustworthy and human-centric. Not all the countries have the same position, of course, but at the same time, this is a little bit the direction. And so maybe it's a little bit more guaranteeism on some of these items, which not necessarily benefit the speed of growth of this, but it's something that at European level, Italian level is thought very important. And on the other side is the actions that you can create. Italy in particular has put actually in the documents I just mentioned, one of the strategic pillars, like the creation of AI Institute, AI agency, which will be placed in Turin, and we'll have something like 1,000 more or less as a ballpark figure people to work on different items. And each of these hubs would actually contribute with a sort of private and public partnership in order to be able to go over it. This is just an example. Of course, there are many more others, but I can tell you that definitely is one of the key topic on the agenda for the action. And on both sides, as I mentioned, on the offer, because you need to pursue it. You need also to allow entrepreneurs like Paolo or big companies to be able to follow it. At the same time, you need to be able to mention and manage it also for yourself. Just here, just allow me appeal. Being an entrepreneur like Paolo, being an entrepreneur, a little bit smaller than Paolo. Italy is the country of SMEs. There are not that many big corporations. It's the country of SME. There are millions of SMEs. There are only 4,000 big companies. Big companies means companies with more than 250 million revenues. All the other 4 millions are small and medium. So then when you talk about AI, you need to allow them to manage it, to pursue such a track, which is something not trivial at all, especially given the competency, the difficulties I mentioned. You need to invest on it. You need to manage such a risk. Anyway, maybe I'm getting a little bit too long, but I hope that I answered the question.
Wow, sounds very interesting. I think Italy will be a fascinating space. And I think going forward, it'll also be interesting to see what collaborations happen between Italian companies and Chinese ones, because the crossover between the West and China is now becoming increasingly difficult. Israel seems to be one of the key sources of technology from the West that's trying to be scaled in China, and AI-driven technologies, which are actually not constrained by language, actually find great application in retail here, for example, to evaluate some of the unstructured text that people leave in comments. Chinese consumers just leave comments all the time here and there. And we have an alum from the Gemba program who is a co-founder of a company called Rehub here in Shanghai, and they bring AI technologies from places like Israel and then apply them in the Chinese context at scale. And so it'll be interesting to see going forward whether Italian companies are able to, for example, take advantage of the fact that they, in a way, have preferential access to the so-called digital Silk Road, right? So I think it's absolutely fascinating. Now, there's a very specific question for you, Paolo, about Island. Is it GDPR compliant?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we take the data and we keep them exactly where they are. So we don't download them or store them. And so, yeah, completely.
And maybe you can pick up this next one about the newspaper, about newspapers. Are they driven by AI selecting news according to interest?
I believe they are already to some extent. And to be honest, I am a hardcore listener of podcasts because basically I don't really have time otherwise. And yeah. I can tell you already that a good chunk of the podcasts that I've been listening to are synthetic, meaning are created by AI. So what that basically means, on my point of view, is that basically someone is monitoring my interest. They see what I'm interested in or not, and then they provide me the data, and they probably build the data for me. And now, why do they build it not with real speakers, but with synthetic forms, with computer forms? I believe because they probably do it in millions. And so in order to do it in millions, obviously you cannot have people to do it. It's again the same thing, when it's about the hardcore, the nitty gritty details that obviously will require too many labor to do it, is the computer that does it. But the part underneath, so as always, is done by the human. And I believe so. I mean, anyway, my point of view and my business, the way we're building it, it's the idea exactly to provide this, to provide to small companies, obviously not, well, small companies, medium companies, because the big companies, I assume at some point will come out with their own solution to provide basically way to 100% personalize your data. This has implication, also ethical, to be honest. And I think that's one of the biggest things that us as society, it's not even political, it's literally sociological on a global level, have to address. Because basically it is true. I mean, all the digital, the world, the way it's done, regardless of me, it's done to basically reinforce what my beliefs and interests are. And if my interests are something and my wife's interests are something else, if we start talking without the computer, all of a sudden we may end up being, two strangers. And this, as humankind, we need to address it.
Very well put, very well put. And also your emphasis on ethics, I think, is just right on the money. People joke that the US have the FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, Netflix, Google, I may have missed, and then China has BAT, Europe has GDPR. And I think Europe really is leading the way on the ethical side of things, and I think that's a very valuable contribution. All right. So next question is about AI in healthcare. You know, one of the well-known thought leaders in AI has said that AI in healthcare won't advance fast until the end of this decade, but then it will become pervasive, you know. So for the time being, it needs to prove that it can actually deliver reliable results. Do you agree? Is that the sort of phase we're in? David, any thoughts?
Well, I don't know how to best explain such a thing. Maybe I would just quote what Paolo said before. So Paolo mentioned before a study that proved more reliability, R square, and whatever in a specific sense. So I think that this proves some of the results, and there are many others that prove at the same time what I mentioned before, and the increased effectiveness. If I have to take this from a different angle, is if you want to prove that AI would replace whatever the people and human being do, has not been proven yet, then I agree. But here we are not there yet. I don't think necessarily this would be the direction. The direction would be to have AI as a tool, not the replacement for what people do. I would not be, to come back also to the example I mentioned before, I would not feel comfortable as a citizen here if my CV is just screened and my role, my job is given to me by a simple AI algorithm, maybe multiple whatever. Because this is what you can think about. Would you feel comfortable if your, let me say, diagnosis is done only by AI algorithm and that's it? Maybe not, as a citizen, as a patient. If I think that AI is a tool that can help the doctor or whoever else to have a better diagnosis, then results are already proven on this. Several items, yes. Some other would require different thing. Of course, if you say that, can I use the, I don't know, like the X-ray AI to prove that you have COVID-19 pneumonia? Maybe it's a little bit newer, but still, I heard data on this. On others, there are clearly results, and probably the example mentioned by Paolo is one of them.
Super. Hey, Paolo. Sure. Please go ahead.
I just shared, and so if you are interested, you can share it with everyone else. An interesting article published by Nature. Nature is the magazine of basically research, medical research, that is. And that article of last year talks about an experiment that has been done by an Italian, by the way, that has to be said by an Italian, at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, on how to use AI appunto in Mount Sinai, in a hospital, basically to help, basically. And it's shocking to me that there is one adjective in the article that study is unsupervised. Well, unsupervised, what does it mean? It means basically the following. I am a patient, I come there, you have, the computer has millions of data, if not billions of data, of people with, like me, white person, like 45, lives in this city, eats that kind of food, does that kind of activity. And basically what they've been doing, they were coming there and say, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. I have a little problem here. Now they tried basically, and the machine, it would basically tell the patient, take this medicine, take this medicine, take this medicine. But what is shocking for me, and that's the term unsupervised, is that the machine had not been taught any biology, any medical studies, nothing, zero. It just read every single book and every single cartella clinica, that I don't know how you say it in English, every single medical folder of every single patient of the Mount Sinai of the last 20 years. And so what does it mean? It means that without studying, but simply learning and understanding and replicating, he's able to basically, the computer is able to tell you what you should do or you should not do. Now, how does that apply? And so I go back to what Davide was saying before. Just think about it like in purely political terms, but sociological even more than political. If you know that there's a higher percentage of tumor in that neighborhood, in that town, or there's a higher percentage of obesity, or there's a higher percentage of people going bald, whatever it is, When you know it, and you can only know it if you're able to process huge volumes of data, you can try basically to change the diet, to change the shampoo, to change whatever it is of that region. And if not, maybe you can come to those people saying, may I recommend you to go live in another town because your basically medical records tells me that you're more likely to get this illness or that illness that is already possible to have here. So change town, go there, go here. And it's huge, it's massive because it's basically predictive and prescriptive medicines, which is my point of view, not my industry, obviously, a huge, huge, not even chunk of business, a huge change in terms of how we live life, you know. I wake up, someone tells me on the basis of billions of data that chances are that I may have a tumor at the age of 40. By the way, I passed 40, so hopefully I'm done. And please don't stay in that town because in that town, there's a higher percentage of tumor already for whatever reason we don't know yet. And so guess what? I'll move away. It's huge. It's huge. AI, because of what it allows you, will change dramatically the life of all of us. I mean, if we want to. If we don't want to, we'll stay exactly the way we are.
All right, right. Just a very, very interesting. Just one very quick clarification from you, Paolo. When you said you don't store data,
yes.
Do you mean that the data set is deleted? You know, the data set training is deleted once.
The data set stays in the platform itself. And it's not downloaded nor obviously distributed.
Okay, that's what you meant. Okay, got it. And so now, very topical question, maybe this is the last one we have time for. David, in terms of these vaccine passports that are being talked about, one of the concerns is about fakes, right? So what is Italy or the European Union more generally thinking about in terms of technological solutions? Is it going to be blockchain or something else?
So I would bluntly say that I don't know yet. So, I mean, from the articles, from the newspaper, there is a clear effort from the EU to go into this thing, and has been agreed to have to move forward, especially to be able for the new, let me say, summer season. Most probably following what the chief vaccine officer at EU level said would be managed with also a QR code, etc. Probably would have also sort of, let me say, verification numbers. I'm not sure that it would follow blockchain items. This is not something I can actually talk about directly. This is just the few information we have, but definitely Italy follows the EU effort that must be managed as a cross-country effort in order to facilitate and help the traveling. But the pure technical aspect here now, it's not something I can I can give you full clarification on. Apologies.
All right. Okay. You know, I think it's time now to start landing this plane, but I have definitely learned a lot from the two of you. So thank you very much. And I think the broad range of perspectives you provided are absolutely fascinating. Clearly, this is something that involves all of society. The impact is for all of society, but the stakeholders and the actors are also very broad and involve involved government, organizations, including startups, as well as all of us as individuals. You know, I really was struck by the fact that one of these early slides that David had showed, you know, that very complex slide, it also referred to the Sustainable Development Goals, among other things. The 2020s was designated by the United Nations as the decade of action. And it strikes me that even with AI, we're at a phase where this feels like the decade of action, meaning there's been so much talk. In fact, people who retire at the age of 65 this year were born in the year that artificial intelligence was invented as a term. That idea has been around for 65 years, but we seem to be at this incredible moment in history when, you know, words are giving way to action, and that action in turn are impacting our words. And I think this was an excellent introduction and overview of these issues of AI in general and with regard to communication in particular. So thank you so much, David and Paolo. Once again, congratulations to Margherita and all the office bearers of this new Italy chapter. Thank you for involving me. I really learned a lot and had fun. Thank you very much.